Hello, and welcome to another episode of Reading Reddit with Amber. Happy Spooky Sunday! Today we have a set of stories from r/LetsNotMeet. I use creepy music in the background for these videos. Because the sound intensity level varies depending on whether you are listening with headphones or without, I have developed both a version that is best with headphones and a version that is best without. You are listening to the headphones version. For the no headphones version, click on the link in the description below. Our first story today is You've Got Mail. This is definitely not the creepiest encounter I've experienced, but it has stuck with me since. I, 24-year-old female, used to go to the smaller university in my city, where I worked as a bartender at the university bar. I also lived about 5 minutes away from campus, which was really convenient most of the time for naps between classes, but it lost its touch after this encounter. I usually worked day shifts on days I didn't have any classes, and my best friend Dan, 23 male, also worked with me. We're really close, so he would hang out during my shift before relieving me most nights. I've known Dan for years, and although a sweetheart, he is often quite oblivious. One day, while Dan was sitting at the bar entertaining me during my shift, a guy sat next to him. The guy seemed normal, around my age, and wasn't bad looking either. He had blonde, disheveled hair and pretty sculpted muscles. He had also clearly come from a construction site because he had work boots and a hard helmet hanging from his belt. This wasn't unusual because we did have a lot of construction near us, and most construction workers in the area were also students at the university. I struck up a conversation with him, going through all of the customer service chit-chat that I was used to saying. When I was busy with another customer, he turned to Dan and started chatting with him, and they seemed to get on quite well. However, I could tell every now and again that the guy kept on sneaking glances at me, which was flattering for the first couple of times and not uncommon as a female bartender. But the longer he did it, I realized there was something about him that was off when he looked at me. Rather than flirtatious, it was like he was watching me. Watching exactly what I was doing, where I was going, how I walked, how I greeted people. It was like he was surveilling me. Sizing me up even. This really set me off for obvious reasons, but also because I've dated a couple of abusive, controlling guys in the past, and the behavior seemed all too familiar. This was when he started to loop me in on him and Dan's conversation. He asked if we knew each other. Obvious answer, yes. We had been joking with each other when he arrived. He then asked how we met and kept asking personal questions about the two of us. I already saw his ramp up coming a mile away before he asked if we were dating. Dan laughed because we get that all the time. We're really close and very comfortable with each other platonically. Dan, being his oblivious self, said no and that he was dating his girlfriend, whom I adore, but that I was single. I immediately saw a shift in the demeanor from this guy, who then turned to me to smile. Although a pretty ordinary response, it sent chills down my spine. Many people would just think he was happy to be able to flirt with me freely, but the look in his eyes was telling. He was pleased because he wanted me to himself. Now, to take a step back, I know this seems like a slight overreaction, but trust me, I know that type of look, and it was frightening as heck. After that, he started asking me personal questions specifically. I tried to go to other customers and act busy to avoid them. Sometimes Dan would answer for me, and I swear the dumb kid thought he was wingmanning me, but darn it, he was so wrong. The guy asked me how old I was, what I was studying at school, where I was from, and all other kinds of normal, but slightly invading questions as a stranger. Finally, Dan got up to get on shift, which meant that mine was almost over. Because the guy didn't really do anything out of the norm, I didn't pull Dan aside, but just patiently waited until I could just go and have a beer far away from this guy. As Dan went into the back, the guy turned his sole attention to me. He asked me what kind of shows I liked to watch, and I answered half-heartedly as I cleaned behind the bar near him. Then suddenly, I looked up and I saw that his face was inches from mine. He had leaned up onto the bar, and I could literally smell him. That's how close he was. He then asked me if I lived alone. I did at the time, but there was no way in heck I was telling this creep that, so I gulped, shook my head, and said I lived with 2 roommates. I thought adding 2 bodies would deter him. He leaned back down onto his seat and hummed. I saw a gleam in his eyes that left me convinced he knew I was lying. At this point, I was shaking, which is really frustrating and unusual for me because I often keep up a rather stoic appearance when it comes to creeps. He seemed to notice and smiled. Then, with a nod, he got up and put on his jacket. "See you later, Gemma." And then he left. Just in time for Dan to come out from the back, the jerk. Dan saw immediately how shaken I was and asked what was wrong. I could barely respond because the thing was, I never introduced myself to the guy. I'd forgotten to. And no one around had said my name. I know, because I asked Dan if anyone had. But the guy knew my name. Unfortunately, that's not the end of the story. After that encounter, I was on high alert for about 4 days. Then I got busy with studying and life stuff and it went to the back of my mind. But not for long. Suddenly, I started seeing the guy everywhere. In the hallways, near my classes, and at the bar. Coincidence turned into obvious intent and I was freaked out. My university was small and there was very little for me to do to avoid him. My biggest worry was that he had seen the way I walked home, so I started to ask people to drive me even though I lived 5 minutes away. None of my friends minded because they're very solid, which I'm very thankful for. After about 3 weeks of this, I had started to tell my friends, who then started a sort of barrier around me. I was never alone outside of class, and I was always taken home by someone. I was starting to feel safer, and I had some other stuff to deal with, so the guy sort of left my mind for a bit again. During that time, I bought a pair of old school yellow Vans because I am a huge fan of retail therapy when I'm depressed and or anxious. About 4 days later, I got the notice saying that they were out for delivery, and I was pretty excited. I don't usually buzz delivery guys into my building and often just let them leave a notice so I can pick the package up, but I decided to buzz the guy in this one time. Immediate gratification or whatever. Anyway, I had work late and was dropped off home by a friend around 10 p.m. I was exhausted but still stoked to get my Vans and have a small positive in my life. But when I rounded the corner to my door, my package wasn't waiting for me. This was weird because they always bring your box to your door when it's a private courier, if they're buzzed into the building. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe the delivery guy hadn't found my door number or maybe delivered it to the wrong apartment. I unlocked my door, which seemed to stick a little, which was also weird, but I shrugged that off too. But when I opened my door, something immediately felt off. Nothing was out of place, but it felt like it. I cautiously stepped into my apartment, gripping my keys between my fingers. My other hand was holding my phone tight, just on the verge of pressing down my emergency call button. That's when I turned to the one thing that wasn't there when I left that morning. My package. It was sitting on my kitchen counter with a note next to it. I started to panic and race through my apartment wielding my keys like a pair of claws. My apartment was small, so it was rather easy to sweep it. No one was there. Just me, my Vans, and the note. Going into survivor mode, I slammed my door, locked and bolted it, and stuck a chair under the handle for good measure. I checked every window to make sure they were locked and that the patio door was as well, which was a sliding glass door. That's when I found the second thing out of place. The security bar I stick behind my patio door was under my couch, where you would have had to been crawling to find it. It was most definitely stuck behind my patio door when I left that morning. As you can imagine, this freaked me out even more, but I was just glad the bar wasn't broken. I placed it back as tight as possible, and then went straight toward my kitchen counter, where the jerk had left my present. My package was open, and my first thought was, hey, that's illegal, before I reminded myself that the guy had literally just broken into my home. My shoes were intact, basically untouched. Next to the box was a handwritten note on one of the sticky pads from my desk in the other room. It read, "Small apartment for 3 people. Enjoy your Vans." Now, I'd like to tell you that I called the police and that I got everything sorted out. But that's not how the story ends. In fact, all I did was cry the whole night and have around 5 panic attacks. The police can't really do much when the guy hasn't done anything malicious, and there was no way for me to trace all of this back to one guy I didn't even know and haven't seen since. However, the school term ended right after this, and I didn't have to go to campus until September. I also immediately moved in with my 2 sisters and brother-in-law, so he had very little ways to bother me after that. But, for the love of God, creepy stalker guy, let's never meet again. And our final story is eerie late night encounter with a family in a black SUV. A few nights ago this happened to me, and I keep thinking about it. Now I work in the criminal justice field where I see a lot of crime, and I'm also naturally a follower of the subreddit, scary movies, and scary stories in general, so I have to disclaim that I do have a heightened sense of paranoia sometimes, but my girlfriend and her roommate both agreed this was weird. I was out walking my girlfriend's roommate's dog as she was working a night shift in their neighborhood, which is in a very safe suburb of New York. I walked across the parking lot and to this field in the middle of a rotary, or a roundabout, whatever you call them, and was screwing around in Reddit since it was near midnight and in the middle of quarantine and there were no cars out. The dog has a long leash, so she was sniffing around, and then I kind of saw her stop and stare toward the road. I looked up and saw a black SUV stopped in the rotary. I pulled on my COVID mask that was on my chin. Since no one was around, I had it half off, as some people in New York are touchy about that, understandably, just in case they stopped to lecture me and I didn't care to engage in a dumb argument. I looked back at my phone and then back up, and the SUV was still there. There was a family. Mother, father in the front, and 12-year-old daughter in the back seat, and I was a bit startled because they were all just blankly staring directly at me. I sort of waved and nodded and then started walking the dog a bit around the grass again, and they started to slowly move. They came around the rotary, and I looked back and all of them were staring directly at me. I figured they may talk to me, so I stopped and waited for them to get around the circle, but when they approached, they kept driving very slowly, all directly staring at me. I gave another half wave and they drove past me, still slowly and staring, back around the circle. Then again around the circle. Literally all of them blanket staring at me, even the little girl in the back seat. I put my arms in like a shrugging gesture as if to say, WTF. They did this a couple more times, and I started to walk up to the edge of the circle to engage. Normally something I would not do, but it was a family, so I sort of felt a bit more brave to do so. They sped up a bit and went around the corner and turned off the rotary. I started to feel even weirder, so I decided I would walk back to her apartment building when they entered the rotary again. I was watching them out of the corner of my eye, and they were still staring. I started picking up the pace, and they turned off the rotary toward me, and I picked up the pace as they followed me. Once I got to the sidewalk, I turned around because I didn't want them to know which door I was walking into. It's on a strip mall with a few other apartment buildings and stores, and they stopped about 30 feet behind me, and they were all staring out the front window. The little girl was in the center seat now, staring too. I once again raised my arms to be like, "Can I help you?" And no response at all from them. I kind of stood there and no movement and took my phone back out and typed their license plate into a note app. Again, a weird thing I do, probably for my work in criminal defense and general paranoia, not really knowing what I'd do with it. Then they slowly turned to the other side of the parking lot, all still staring, until they got to the end of the lot, and I rushed into the apartment building, which luckily needs a code to enter. I got up and told my girlfriend and then her roomie in the AM, and they were both kind of freaked out. I watched them out of her window, and they pulled back up to where I was standing on the sidewalk and just sat there in their car. I couldn't see them at this point, but the roof of their car. It felt like 10 minutes, and they slowly drove away. I can't stop thinking about their creepy blank stare at me. Somehow it made it creepier that it was a normal-looking family with a young daughter. If it was like 2 younger guys, I could have marked it off as they were bored and screwing with me, but this was just blank, unmoving expressions that made it so eerie. To that weird family in the black SUV, let's not meet, even though I'm desperate for an explanation. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, consider giving it a like or letting me know in the comments. I release new videos twice a week. I do funny or outrageous stories on Wednesdays and spooky stories on Sundays. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.